Good evening. Thank you all for coming to the second series of the Hayes Lecture Series put on by Sam and Jeannene Hayes, one of our alums that graduated in 1962. His goal was to have a room full of students, such as yourselves, come in, listen to successful business people that can inspire and motivate and get you to want to do something really big after your schooling here and make something big out of it. Our speaker this year is Colonel Cameron Leiker, and he came to ESU as a transfer student from Butler County Community College. And he walked the streets of Commercial, and he decided that this is the place that he was going to come to. And he majored in economics and minored in math, and he went on to earn his MPA from Harvard. And he recently earned his master's in leadership Leadership Economics, Resource Management, and Logistics from the National Defense University's Defense College. He just got promoted to colonel, which is just below general. It's a big deal. And he has a passion for leadership, and he has a passion for students. He's going to talk about that this evening. As a result of our inaugural series for the Hayes Lecture Series last year, we had our speaker last year, Doug, and his wife, Nan. Nan is here as well. They pledged that they would like to give out scholarships at this lecture series. If that helps with attendance, if it helps motivate you to come, they're also giving back. They're both alums that graduated from here and believe a lot in leadership as well. So I believe when you walked in, you were each given a form. If you don't have one of these, please raise your hand. And you have something to write with too? What we'd like for you to do is listen to Colonel Leiker, and at the end of it, think of some thoughtful questions that you have, and be sure to fill out the questionnaire at the end. And when you're done, you will exit and give them to Mary, and this will be given to the scholarship committee, and they will determine, based on your answers and what you've learned from whether it was the workshop today or the lecture, your eligibility for one of the $1,000 scholarships. We're all clear? Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest, all the way from Fort Eustis, Virginia, Colonel Cameron Leiker.
Steve, are we on? Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure you're asking, why are we here, and who's this guy, and what's he going to talk to us about? Well, I hope over the next 4 or 5 hours we'll get the answers to all those questions. I will just tell you, yeah, I'm a little bit nervous up here, so just bear with me. We'll get going here in a minute. But when I came back today, it kind of reminded me of coming home. Even though I didn't grow up in Emporia, Emporia State was an informative time in my life. And I really hope as students that you realize this, to where when I came back on campus today, I had professors who 22 years ago were my faculty advisors meeting me saying, welcome home. That doesn't happen in a lot of schools out there. I'm just telling you right now. You are truly blessed and fortunate to be here, to have the organization, the structure, the community, and I'll mention a little bit of that later. I'm both humbled and honored to be here tonight, and I look forward to sharing with you my thoughts on building dynamic leaders for the future, based upon my education, experiences, successes, and failures. But before I start, I owe a debt of gratitude to a few people who made this happen here tonight. First, I want to thank Dr. Sam and Jeannene Hayes for their visionary leadership in establishing this lecture series highlighting stories of success from Emporia State University graduates. Your gift to ESU will continue to grow with a lifelong payback as we build leaders for the future. Please join me in a round of applause for this outstanding couple who have served ESU in a variety of capacities. I also want to thank Doug Smith, who was last year's inaugural speaker, where he discussed leadership and how ESU and Emporia shaped his life and others. If you missed it, I recommend you view it on YouTube. Unfortunately, Doug is not here tonight, but his lovely wife, Nan, is. Nan? Okay. We owe you a debt of gratitude for you and Doug's visionary leadership to establish these scholarships to help out young students. I also want to thank Dr. and Mrs. Sean Rock for their vision and commitment to ESU. I had a chance to discuss with him the future and things about leadership earlier today, and I am absolutely amazed at the vision for the future of this university. And I hope that you finally realize this someday, to where it takes a dynamic leader with vision who can establish purpose, who can motivate people to make necessary change. And I think you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of where this great university is going to go as it transforms. Your innovative leadership and passion are exactly what we need as we transform ESU into a true center of excellence. Of course, I would not be here tonight if several key people had not done the hard work to make it happen. Pam, it has been a pleasure working with you, and your energy and spirit are amazing. Your efforts helping ESU every day are key to our success. To a gentleman by the name of Bret Larson, who is no longer at ESU, he set into motion this process when he came out to D.C. over a year ago and to visit. And we sat down one day in a restaurant one night for about 2 hours, and we talked about leadership. And he called me up later on and said, "Hey, I think I have a great opportunity for you. Would you like to do it?" And I said, "Of course." And then so many months later, here we are. Finally, I'd like to thank Gwen, Tyler, Dave, Steve, and a whole bunch of other people behind the scenes to put this together. And if I've left anybody out, please accept my apologies. Finally, I want to take a minute to thank my Phi Delta Theta brothers, Roger Heineken, Mark Edgecombe, and others who have made it here tonight. And I also want to thank 3 former instructors here, Mr. Jansen, Mr. Catlin, and Mr. Falsetto, all from the business department, by the way. Okay, my favorite teacher, Mrs. Helen Wagner, and her husband, Kenneth. Thank you for inspiring tens of thousands of students over the year, and I just hope the little kid from Skelly Elementary can make you proud. Least but not least, I would like to thank my wonderful parents, Wayne and Eve Leiker, for their unconditional love, encouragement, and support for these years, and I could not have done it without you, and thank you for shaping me and letting me grow into the person that I am today. Unfortunately, my lovely wife, Maria, who's also a colonel in the Army, cannot be here tonight. She is commander of the 93rd Signal Brigade, which controls 33 communication centers spread out on the East Coast. We also just moved into a new quarters on post this last weekend, so I'm not gaining any cool husband points right now, as she's unboxing stuff and I'm not there, by the way. Okay. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, being back is like coming home. Things have changed, but yet things have stayed the same here in Emporia State 22 years later. Different stores, different places to go. But the same attitude and spirit and pride is here. I was at Butler County and I was debating on where I was going to be going for my last 2 years. Went all the way down to Arizona State University, looked at Wichita State, thought about KU, was heading up to K-State. And I stopped at this place called Emporia. And instead of coming to the campus, I stopped several blocks down the street, parked my vehicle, got out, and I started walking the town. I started going into the shops, I started talking to people, and I started to see quickly how they had pride in the community and how they had pride in the university and the students. So by the time I got back in my vehicle and drove here, I knew this is where I was going to be, and this is where I was going to call home for my last 2 years of college. You could say I knew I was going to be coming here before I ever arrived, and it was just the beginning of an adventure that has really set the foundation for me. Today has been an exceptional day as I had lunch with several key alumni and administrators to include retired military. And for those of you that have served in any capacity, thank you for your service, by the way. We talked about the challenges that we face as a country and military and what we are focusing on to maintain our decisive edge in the world as truly the lone superpower. I spent some time with Mary Shively's basic leadership class, who, like Mary, are all a ball of energy. Okay, and thank you, Mary, for what you do every day to teach, coach, and mentor our students. I wish I had these leadership classes when I was here, and we talked about skills, successes, failures, and recommended classes to take. And it was truly an interactive and a fun time. You can see how each student there wants to be here and wants to make a difference in life. In the past 22 years as a commissioned officer, I have spent a lot of time thinking about leadership. It is one of the most important aspects of any profession, whether you are a parent, teacher, business person, priest, military member, or government leader. Societies, nations, organizations, and people need competent, dynamic leaders, especially in today's highly complex, interconnected world. So tonight I thought I'd spend a little time talking about my journey so you have a perspective on my thoughts and hopefully answer the question, why is this guy up here talking to me? I will then focus on tonight's topic, building dynamic leaders, by providing thoughts on why leadership is important, what attributes and skills are required in a multidisciplinary leader, and finally I'm going to introduce an idea of how Emporia State University can build upon the current leadership program, how we can refocus it into a center, and eventually migrate it into a leadership school with a center of excellence. The intent is to integrate the disciplines of education, business, and government into a leadership skills that dynamic leaders can use in any facet of their life. But before I start, it might be helpful if I relay a little bit about myself. I call this part setting the conditions. I was fortunate that I grew up in a very loving home with fantastic parents, my best friends until I met my wife, and a wonderful brother who is still my hero. My parents nourished my Catholic faith and instilled values and beliefs that I hold close to me today. Faith, family, honesty, hard work, and of course, education. Additionally, I was blessed to have 3 fantastic teachers that left indelible marks on me. First, Mrs. Wagner, my 5th and 6th grade teacher who worked with every child she taught. She always called them her kids, okay, and never gave up on us. Mr. Dunsmore, my 10th and 11th grade math teacher who took the time to tutor me and who taught me hard work will overcome innate abilities. And Coach T, or Torres, my football and wrestling coach who reinforced hard work and character define a person more than performance. I have also blessed with several military mentors of all ranks who believed in me, followed me, pushed me to grow into my full potential. In total, I have been in the Army for over 26 years, now in some capacity. Joining the Army was my first major decision in life and led to a profession where God wants me to serve for now. Although I had grown up playing Army, I never really thought about joining the military service. And then one day in high school, it hit me. This is an avenue to get to college. So I know that's something that my parents wanted me to do, so I enlisted in the Kansas Army National Guard. I went away to basic training, and that was an experience. You kind of hear stories about, basic training, etc. But I left high school at 5'4" and 130 pounds, and when my parents showed up 13 weeks later, I had put on 4 inches and about 25 pounds. So my parents were a little surprised what they were feeding me, I guess. But it was a formative time, and I can still remember the very first day as I jumped off that truck as a young E1 private. And I got all my gear on the front and the back, and I'm dragging duffel bags that are bigger than me. And I jump off this truck, the second to last person off, and I look up, and there's this big, huge drill sergeant staring at me. And everybody's running into this building, and they're screaming at him and pulling him down and everything like that. And he looks at me and he said, "Son, don't let me beat you in there." And sure enough, I can guarantee you, carrying about 200 pounds of gear, he didn't beat me in there. Then we got woken up the next morning very, very early. Drill sergeant comes by with a flashlight at about 4 o'clock in the morning. He goes to one guy, goes to the next guy. There's a gap. So then he points it down at me, and the funniest, he tried to stop from laughing, but he said, "Does your mother know that you're here?" And I said, "Yes, drill," in the private answer, "Yes, drill sergeant, she's the one who signed the paperwork so I could be here." And that's the last time he made sure that I shaved. But those were the formative times to where you make decisions, you live through the consequences, to where you start to grow as a person. You come out from that umbrella that you had in school. So after returning from basic training, the next 4 years at Butler County Community College and here at Emporia State, coupled with service in the National Guard, were very formative. I remember my time here in class, the many hours in RTC, my time with my Fight Out brothers, and assisting the new Diddy Catholic Campus Center as a student economic advisor. I almost forgot the great library I lived in as I was studying for econ and math. I think there's a room over there that's got still my scratch marks on the wall from trying to get out of there. Okay? And ESU is where I learned to be on my own, make mistakes, have successes and failures, and to learn about leadership. It's where my roommate Noel and I got to the end of every month my senior year, and one would look at the other say, so what's for dinner? Two options, macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, or hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. And if it wasn't for the little old lady across the hallway who lent us a gallon of milk each month halfway through, we probably would have never survived. We also spent a lot of time in ROTC. We were a very close group here, and unfortunately the ROTC program's not here, but we're gonna try to work on getting that back here. But since graduating from ESU, I have been blessed with opportunities at various stages in my life and my career. These opportunities have shaped me in who I am and how I got here. And in short, over the last 22 years as an officer, I have served in both tactical, operational, and strategic assignments, which have shaped my thought process and trained me to think and lead differently. I have worked through complex problems, developed creative solutions, briefed our most senior Department of Defense officials, and sat in the room where they made decisions. Being a fly on the wall has allowed me to see how strategic leaders think and how they make decisions, which was totally different than what I thought when I first came out of college. Early in my career, I formed a personal leadership motto and philosophy that has stuck, and I mentioned this to the class earlier today. My motto is leadership and service. My philosophy has two priorities: to train your people and to take care of them. If you do those two things, everything else will fall in place, because your employees, family, or whomever will be there to support you because you support them. As a young officer, I began a leadership path centered on three distinct areas. The first is education, which the Army and the military are very, very interested in. Leadership positions and staff assignments. Of course, as a young officer and an NCO, all you want to do is be in leadership positions, but you got to realize that it takes all three to really be an effective leader. As a lifelong learner, I attended several military and civilian schools and quickly highlight three that opened my eyes to a much larger picture at various stages in my career. The first was in 1994 and 95 when I was selected by the Army to go to the United States Marine Corps Amphibious Warfare School. This is where the Marine Corps sends their elite top officers, who were normally senior captains or junior majors, to go to this school, and only about 200 a year ago. And the Army sends 6 people, and I was selected. While I was there, I learned a lot from my peers, which later on in life came back to benefit me. I graduated as one of the honor graduates that year, the only non-Marine, and I formed friendships that when I was in South Korea and on the battlefields of Iraq paid huge dividends, as my unit that I was in at that time was selected to go support a Marine unit to the south of Baghdad. When I showed up to introduce us, I realized that one of my classmates was the deputy commander of the unit, and the commander of the unit was one of my former instructors at the Amphibious Warfare School. So you really never know how small a world it is as you continue to travel around and you meet people. Second, from 2011 to 2012, my wife and I were fortunate enough to attend the National Defense University's Industrial College of the Armed Forces, which has just been renamed the Eisenhower School of Leadership. ICAF, as it was formerly called, is a senior war college focused on national security and resource management, where approximately 300 senior U.S. and international military officers, as well as U.S. government and business professionals, focus on strategic level issues affecting the world in diplomatic, informational, military, and economic spheres. Mary, you'll remember this from earlier today when we talked about that. When one of the students asked us about national security and how does education and leadership fit in. And what I did is I took these 4 centers of power and I kind of walked them through how important it is, and I asked them to make comments on. And we had some very, very interesting answers today. Also, while we were there, it's structured around strategic leadership, economics, resource management, logistics, and leadership. We have 2 focus areas in the business industry and also in a region of the world. I chose the education area of focus, but unfortunately I was not able to get that. I ended up getting transportation, which was fantastic. But my wife ended up getting education. And what ended up happening is she went around to visit different places in the world and the United States and quickly discovered that although in the United States we spend a lot of money educating our students, unfortunately we don't get the greatest bang out of the buck compared to some other countries in the world. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how Emporia State can be a center of excellence and how in the future we can rekindle that spirit. I also chose for my region, South Pacific, as its increasing importance in all aspects, and I wanted to better understand it. The international exposure and travel to see businesses, people, and societies provided a well-rounded view of the challenges and opportunities facing us in today's world. And lastly, I want to talk about from 1999 to 2000, when I was leaving South Korea after 4 years and 2 company commands. I was selected to attend Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government, now the Harvard Kennedy School, for a 1-year executive master's in public administration. After I finished my company commands, I had been communicating with my administrative resource people, so to speak, back in Washington, D.C., about trying to go to a ROTC assignment so that I could get a master's degree at night, and they kept telling me no. And eventually one day, they called me up and said, hey, we have a full-time opportunity. Do you want to apply for it? And I said yes, because I remember both my parents and teachers telling me, do not ever turn down training, schooling, or education. So I ended up saying yes, and a few weeks later I was told that I was selected. There are only 3 officers selected per year for this program, and my 2 contemporaries were from the Military Academy, West Point, and Princeton. So I was in pretty steep company there, and I was actually a little nervous about how I was going to stack up, to my peers. Not in a competitive nature, but is my degree and my education going to be comparable? This is kind of where it gets funny. So I'm in Korea at night talking to this guy on the phone. He calls to congratulate me that I'm going to go to Harvard. And I said, hey, that's great. And he said, congratulations. I just want to let you know that you 1 of 3 people selected, along with a military academy and a Princeton graduate. And I said, okay. I said, where is this place? He said, you got to be kidding me. It's Harvard. I said, hey, listen. I'm like a blind squirrel who finds an occasional acorn here. I come from Kansas. I went to a junior college. I went to a great school in Emporia, and I can tell you where every Big 12 football team is at. But I'm telling you right now, I don't know where this place is at. So he was astonished, and eventually he said, it's in Cambridge. I said, Cambridge? Where's Cambridge? And he goes, it's in Massachusetts. I said, okay, so what big city is it near? He goes, Boston. I said, well, why didn't you just tell me Boston? I got to figure out where I'm going to be moving next, So I will tell you that later on, after I showed back up at the Pentagon after my degree, one of the senior officers on the selection committee noticed my name and came up and he said, you're the kid from Emporia State University that went to Harvard, aren't you? And I said, yes. So I will tell you, and this is no lie, Emporia State is known nationally and internationally. You may not think that, but wait till you go over and you see the Power E. People really resonate with it because it has a long history of having excellent schools, education, business, art. So it doesn't matter what your curriculum is, what area you're in, Emporia State is a great place to be. While at Harvard, I saw the difference in undergraduate and graduate level students and how they think differently. I was able to take classes from a highly diverse faculty that included former senior government, military, and business professionals. And I learned how to critically analyze situations, how to develop realistic, strategic level solutions, and how to communicate them to senior leaders. But one of the greatest lessons I learned was to develop and communicate depth and breadth to your solutions. I was telling the president this earlier today. One of my former instructors was the deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget underneath the Carter administration. And eventually he became the Deputy Secretary of Defense, the #2 position. And he was telling us one day a quick story about when he was the Deputy OMB, and they had to take the big, massive president's budget in to President Carter and set it on the table. So he gets his 5 minutes of fame. He walks in, the president's signing some paperwork. He looks up at him and he says, John, welcome. Hello, Mr. President. He said, what do you got for me today? He said, well, I have this binder here, and it's got, your budget in it that we're getting ready to submit to Congress, and I need you to sign it. So he scoots it across the big table. The president turns it around. He opens it up. He's getting ready to put the pen to paper. He puts the pen down, and he looks up at him, and he says, so is everything in here I wanted? He kind of tap danced a little bit, and he's like, well, Mr. President, a lot of hard work and everything else. He said, but we really weren't able to get it all in. So he closed the book, he spun it around, he pushed it back across his desk, and he said, So is that a problem for you or a problem for me? He grabs the binder, he says, Mr. President, we'll be back shortly with everything you wanted in your budget. And that's kind of how it works at that level. Since graduating in 2000, I have used the creative and critical thinking skills I learned every day in my life. And as an Army officer, you get a chance to lead and develop people. You get to shape organizations at different aspects in your career. I've led 4 different platoon-level organizations as a lieutenant in Germany and commanded 2 companies in South Korea. These assignments allowed me to grow dramatically as a leader, and I can remember my very first platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Walton, my senior enlisted advisor, who told me, "Sir, I'm going to teach you how to win." Now, I had played sports, and I know how to win. Whoever's got the highest score at the end kind of wins. But I didn't understand what he was meaning. He said, "Sir, I want to teach you how to win with people." I was like, "So this is the great leadership lesson of life, is people?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "If you get to know your people and you understand them, and you then turn around and you take care of them, you will never fail." And 22 years later, I can tell you, he was absolutely right. It's one of the most valuable lessons in my life, and it is so simple. It left an indelible mark on me that day onward. He told me that to win with people, especially soldiers, you got to get to know them and to use their name. I also found out that this was also a key to building high-performing teams. As a mid-level leader, I served as the operation officer, 3rd in command of a combat battalion in Iraq from 2004 and 2005. We were involved in some combat operations, but more importantly, we helped build schools, medical facilities, and infrastructure in an area neglected by Saddam Hussein and his regime. They had basically neglected it based on religious differences. And it was a shame because you truly had haves and have-nots. The basic infrastructure and the services in that part of the city were totally broken. This area was the 2nd most volatile section of Baghdad, and we assisted the Iraqi people, military and government, transition from a dictatorial rule to a democratic-style country. The highlight of this came in one of the proudest moments of my life as a military officer, was when we assisted the Iraqis in voting for the first free election in decades. The night before the election, I had a team of American soldiers, and we drove around all of southern Baghdad, delivering hundreds of thousands of ballots, with Iraqi military people doing the work. The next day, we woke up to massive lines of people coming out in absolute droves. My boss even commented that he saw a grandson pushing his grandmother dressed in her best clothes in a wheelbarrow for over 2 miles so that she could vote for the first time in her life, free of oppression. And they were all so proud of holding the purple finger up. Okay. That right there was a moment that left an indelible mark on me of what it takes to be a leader and how people can react to you when you provide them the avenue in order to succeed. Upon returning from Iraq, I transferred jobs within the same unit, became 2nd in command, or the executive officer. And shortly after that, we ended up deploying to New Orleans to support Operation Katrina. That was an eye-opener as we witnessed the sudden change in situation that affected hundreds of thousands of people, and still today there are areas down there that haven't returned. I learned how there are a myriad of support agencies available and how they all wanted to help, but it takes firm leadership and negotiation to integrate government, private, and religious-based organizations and keep them focused on the objective, so to speak, when they all have separate agendas. And although I spent years in leadership jobs, none was more fulfilling than my 3 years as a commander of Headquarters Command Battalion, where I commanded over 7,300 soldiers and 53 organizations subordinate to us within the National Capital Region and the world. Not because I was in command was this important. It's what I learned leading a diverse group of people who you do not see on a daily basis, worked with numerous professional organizations, and helped people through some very complex issues they were facing. These included soldiers and families dealing with combat injuries, post-traumatic stress, suicidal ideations, financial hardships, and a myriad of other situations. I learned several great lessons, but want to highlight 2 in particular. First, be careful of making assumptions about people because you may not know the extent of their situation and how they are reacting. And the power of intervention and help are amazing and change lives. I don't want you to think that all I did was handle complex situations. There was a lot of other things that I did. But I just wanted to relay to you that it takes firm and caring leadership in order to help those people, especially in a time of need. The third area is key staff assignments, where I've had unparalleled opportunities to participate in decisions and watch how senior leaders think, decide, and act. I've served on 2 personal staffs for 2- and 3-star generals and learned an immense amount watching their interactions. During my last assignment in South Korea, I was thrust into a staff job outside my career field and in 2 grades higher than what I was supposed to be. And it took a different type of leadership to lead your peers. When you are in a positional type leadership, you kind of have some form of innate authority over them. But when you are in a position of peers, that's when leadership can really happen. And that's where it gets really, really tough. I've worked in the Pentagon 2 separate times, the first from 2000 to 2002, where I was involved in supporting the Army's transformation campaign plan, where we tried to take about a 1.6 million person Army and totally transform it. It was then that I learned how to manage, shape, and lead a large organization. It was also very personal for me. It is where a plane hit on 9/11, and my wife, my fiance at the time, and I did not know if the other one was alive, considering that the plane was about 2 floors below me at that time. And my wife lost a workmate at the point of impact. We were engaged at the time and were out of communication for most of the day. We learned a lot about ourselves. I remember talking to people as we waited outside to go back in if called upon. Several of us were talking, and one senior officer outside commented that the world is not the same. During my second tour in the Pentagon, it was from 2006 to 2008, and we were in the height of combat operations in Iraq. I worked on the Joint Staff in an area called Global Force Management, where I dealt with developing plans that deployed people, tens of thousands of people, to the combat zone and back again. Although it was hectic and stressful, it was one of the most rewarding assignments in my career. At that time, I worked on a variety of projects directly supporting the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, other senior leaders in Congress, and even had some of my work mentioned by the President of the United States. We worked on issues related to deploying the forces to combat the drawdown in Iraq and the surge in Afghanistan, and congressional and presidential reports, like I said. I learned how strategic decisions have huge long-term impacts on people, families, and organizations. And I can tell you this right now, that was always on the forefront of the mind of the President, the Secretary of Defense, and all the senior leaders, is what is this going to do to our people? They're not widgets, they're not numbers, but people. And we are a country and a military that highly, highly value our people. I learned how to prioritize resource challenges, how senior leaders communicate, and once again, how they think, decide, and act. And finally, in my current assignment as the Director of Human Capital Enterprise, we are helping shape what the Army needs to look like in the future for both military and Department of the Army civilians. But we are also looking at what skills and attributes we need, as it takes a long time to develop them. Today, I look at the people and leaders throughout a lens based upon my experiences, successes, and failures that I just relayed to you. My extensive education, my positions, and my assignments shaped me and provided me a great perspective on leadership and people. As with the senior officer outside the Pentagon on 9/11, the world has indeed changed. Just think for a moment what happened in the last 20 years. How many people were here 20 years ago? How many people were not here 20 years ago? Okay, about 60-40, so to speak. Changes are all around us, and the strategic context and the challenges we face have definitely changed. In 1990, when I graduated, we were still a world with 2 superpowers, relative U.S. financial prosperity, and societies in relative balance across the world. Today, we face an ever-growing globalization, demographic shifts, emerging powers, increasing resource conflicts, and fiscal constraints, as well as social media and rapid access to information and technology that shape situations and reactions faster than we ever imagined. People and organizations have to be highly innovative and adaptive, and the need for highly skilled people and leaders are in true great demand. In Mary's leadership class today, we discussed a lot of things to include what is leadership, how do you take care of people, and how do you handle adversity. I mentioned that leadership is not management of people, resources, systems, or processes. Management is just a skill that leaders use, but is not the end-all, be-all, even though you learn some fancy things in business schools. Leadership is about developing, inspiring, and leading people through change. Leadership is not positional. It's about believing in yourself, establishing purpose and a path for the organization, inspiring others to believe in you as the leader, and ultimately following you. This is very relevant in combat or challenging situations when you see informal leaders provide initiative, rally others, and accomplish the mission. Leadership is not about fear. This may get your short-term results, but will not stand the test of time or adversity. And finally, leadership is not fixed. It is about personal, professional, and organizational growth as you mature and take on new challenges throughout your career. In my view, some people are born with a tendency to be leaders, but almost anyone can be a leader. And no matter what, you have to continue to grow on it and work with it. I also mentioned how it is amazing to see someone come out of his or her shell, realize their potential, develop into a leader, and to lead others. It is also a very rewarding process to sit back and see that happen. I also told them that they are so lucky to have this leadership minor. Great faculty, a wonderful president, and an administration that fully supports it. Why, you ask? People in organizations are more effective when they feel a sense of purpose, understand their goals, and believe in leadership, and get to share in the successes. And we had a discussion about that today. That if you work for a person that doesn't take care of you, how inclined later on, when the times are tough, are you going to try to rally around and help that person? And the student that I had asked said, not very much. And I said, you're probably not going to stay at that organization, are you? And she mentioned, probably not. That's true. And effective, dynamic, multidisciplinary leaders learn how to work with their people, listen to their people, and build effective organizations. I had a discussion one day with an officer who outranked me, and I reminded him in a very respectful way that leadership and loyalty are a two-way street, especially loyalty. You cannot demand loyalty. You have to give it first. And from that giving and taking care of your people, you'll get loyalty back. So what makes a good or a great leader? We talked a little bit about that today in class. Well, there are 1,000 answers and everybody is going to be correct. But see, some key characteristics that I observed are the following. Leaders, first of all, have to have a positive attitude. You have to be excited about what you do and where you're at and what your organization does. It's infectious. And negativity does not breed loyalty or a sense of purpose. People who go to work in fun, energetic workplaces mention the positive attitude and how it makes them feel. And that's also where true productivity is enhanced. Passion and inspiration plus energy are needed so others see how important your idea or change is. The inspiration to follow you and to see your energy and commitment throughout the upcoming challenges. The example I'll use is General Eisenhower, who was great at this during World War II. At the very, very beginning, he was a relatively senior field grade officer, and he got promoted up to brigadier general. Marshall noticed him and quickly moved him up the ranks. And then President Roosevelt placed him in charge of U.S. operations in North Africa and eventually in Europe. This caused some consternation, especially with the British, who thought a more senior officer needed to be in charge. But Roosevelt and Marshall understood the passion that Eisenhower had, his leadership abilities, and that he was eventually going to get it done. He inspired his forces through sheer energy and eventually saw the campaign through to success. And we know the outcome of that. The defeat of the Nazis and their regime over there in Europe, and the foundation of a peaceful world in there for pretty much all time up till now. The third area I'll talk about is value-based people focus. Leaders are about leading and serving others, not the other way around. And I tried to highlight that today in class. Leaders are responsible to train and take care of their people and have to be accountable for their actions and also inactions. If you analyze the best places to work list compiled every year, you see companies like Apple, Google, Southwest Airlines, and many small family companies, and even a lowly paid police force in the Hampton Roads, Virginia area. Why? Because they are value-based, people-focused places where people feel that they make a difference. I get very nervous when I hear organizations states that customers are number one or safety is number one. My philosophy is your people are number one. If your people are number one, they take care of your organization and thus your customers or your people, and success will follow. Building relationships and getting to know your people, just like Staff Sergeant Walton's I'm going to teach you how to win nugget. You have to understand your people in order to lead them, motivate them, and develop them. It does not come from a power position, but it's a win-win situation. Earlier today, we also talked about communicating purpose, principles, and values, how they are essential to be an effective leader so that you can set your organization on a clear path. And also, you need to anticipate, embrace, and lead change. That's what leadership is all about. Change. Whether it's growing your people, changing your organization, and improving it. One of the greatest leadership axioms out there is, as a leader, you assume responsibility for everything your organization does and does not do. But unfortunately, some leaders try to pass the buck or to blame others. In the end, they're not true leaders. And finally, like I mentioned before, you have to embrace education and lifelong learning. Probably the greatest characteristic is having the desire to continue to learn. The progression of education, skills, and experiences, and constantly adapting them is paramount to developing as a leader. So how do we build these dynamic leaders, and what do they need in their quote-unquote toolbox to be successful? What skills and classes do we need to take? And once again, we talked a little bit about that today. The first is creative and critical thinking. It's the first step. You have to be able to analyze and enhance decisions that you make. You have to understand the challenges and opportunities and identify risk and mitigate it as best you can. A great leader once told us that most people spend 10% of their time thinking through a problem and 90% of the time working it and trying to fix it. Rather, they should spend 90% of their time thinking through the problem, which will then only require 10% of the time solving it and fixing it. You can substitute whatever percentage you like, but the intent is clear, that thinking through the problem is the most critical step. However, some people have become paralyzed by overthinking. Great leaders know how to balance the thinking and the gut instinct necessary, and we talked a little bit about that today. These skills are becoming more important as we live in an ever-increasing complex world where you have to understand cultures, languages, and demographics to gain importance and to see how we can see and handle the situations in front of us. The example is the insightful book, The Bottom Billion by Paul Collier, which talks about why the poorest countries are failing and what can be done about it. Throwing money and quick solutions are not the answer. Rather, creative and critical solutions are key. To gain these skills, I told students today to stretch your mind with classes that make you think. Challenge yourself, because most of us fall into one category or the other, creative or critical. If you're a creative person, classes in economics, science, and history are important. And if you are a critical thinking person, I recommend art and behavioral sciences, to name a few. The second major area is analytical skills. Besides the thinking through problems, it is imperative to have a firm analytical foundation. As an econ major with a minor in math, do you really think that I was going to leave that part out? No. Okay? Those foundations I learned here at Butler and Emporia State have carried me through the day in multiple ways. I will tell you that right now. That having the ability to process an immense amount of data and information in a very quick fashion, to be able to formalize it and to visualize it, is very, very helpful when you relate to senior leaders. Now, I'm not saying you have to have a strong foundation of taking Econ 401, calculus, or rocket science. But I would say that a strong foundation in economics, math, and science are important. This was very evident when I was working in the Pentagon on the global staff and global force management. We were working through some very tough decisions that required surging massive amounts of troops and equipment into theater, tens of thousands at a time. The analytics of how to get them there, equip them, sustain them, and eventually bring them home was complex, but that was the easy part of the math equation. It was not an exercise in widgets and numbers, but a complex problem to fully analyze the situation on how best to accomplish this mission, while simultaneously training and taking care of soldiers and families that were on the brink of breaking because of the repeat deployments. This came to a head when senior military leaders made the decision to recommend to the President to extend Army forces for 15 continuous months in combat. Believe me, the senior leaders wanted to know the analytics and the human dimensions behind that recommendation before they took it to Congress and the President of the United States. Throughout this process, we could have been held captive by overthinking and relying too much on the data. However, analytical tools coupled with both types of thinking are important. That would be creative and critical, which leads us to the next major skill of dynamic leaders: decision making. As most of us know in this room, making decisions and living with the consequences can be tough. Dynamic leaders know how to make decisions, which include knowing when to make them. We talked about that today. Do you have enough information? Do you have too much information? And what is the right amount of information? And there is no answer to that. That's where that gut instinct and experience come in. General Colin Powell once said that he needed just 30% of the information to make a decision, and 80% was too much. I agree with him. Next, within the decision-making model, we have to understand the actual implied costs. And I actually had a student today mention opportunity cost, and she wasn't even an econ major. I was so proud of her. Okay. You have to do the right thing. You have to understand the opportunity cost and the trade-offs of your decisions or lack of indecisions. You have to have the conviction to support your decision, the wisdom to know when you have made it, when you have made a mistake, and when to change it. That's a very complex thing to do, especially under stressful conditions. Communicating. It's not just about talking. How many here have a smartphone? How many of you text all your friends? Okay, the same hands are going up. I will tell you that for some of us a little longer in the tooth than you, that's a little difficult. You will be surprised how some of the senior leaders are wrestling with how to communicate with you. Because in the social media world, that's what you live by, which is not what we lived by. Okay? So how do we communicate with you? We're getting there, but slowly. But what I want to tell you is oral and written communication skills will never go out of style. And it's what the senior leaders want and need. I will tell you that leading by walking around is also another thing that you need to understand. Don't just text somebody or email. Go over and talk with them. That's one of the best things you can do as a leader, is to get out and see and know your people. However, in the communication field, at some point, you need to make a decision and you need to communicate your principles, your values, and your purpose. Like I stated, social media and the rapid transmission of information have forever changed how we communicate, and it also creates numerous challenges and opportunities. Leaders today need to blend all types of communication skills, some, like I stated, which did not exist when we were in school. Please take communication skills as was evident when I was at Harvard and took courses from the same Deputy Secretary of Defense who took it to a whole new level. They would give us a very complex problem. We'd have to develop a solution, and we'd have to defend that solution in one piece of paper, double-spaced. And let me tell you something. Trying to get something across the goal line, quote unquote, to the President or to the Secretary of Defense in less than 2 pages is very difficult. When we briefed them, it wasn't fancy briefings. It was briefings with substance. Because as they stated, you don't get 60 seconds in the elevator to make your point. Senior leaders don't have that amount of time. And they make decisions based upon what you communicate. The last area is people skills, or the human dimension, which I've kind of highlighted throughout. A dynamic leader sees that people skills are the most important and, unfortunately, the most underutilized skill we have. It is why we are leaders. Besides building relationships and getting to know your people, you must develop them. In the military, we call that teach, coach, and mentor. Here on campus, you have teachers who lead you, who train you, who take you through those steps. And I know that within the President's vision in the future, you're also going to have academic coaches who are going to lead you through this process of your 1 through 4 or more years here at Emporia State. But more importantly, we as alumni, as business leaders, as people outside of the university need to become mentors. And I asked a couple people today in class, do you have a mentor? And one gentleman looked at me and he said, no. And I said, why not? He really didn't know how to answer, and I said, have you asked? We owe it to them in order to mentor them, because that's the last and final stage in developing leaders, and it's a lifelong process. I will tell you, and I will use Mrs. Wagner as an example. Between her and her husband, they have over 100 years of teaching and service to students. Now, I don't know if that deserves a round of applause, but it is for me, I'm telling you right now. They not only taught students, they coached new teachers, and after retirement, went back in and mentored them between just the teacher and those senior mentors without the administration. So that's a perfect example. And Roger Heineken, who was our advisor in the Phi Delta Theta, is another phenomenal example of what a teacher, a coach, and a mentor can be. Thank you both, or all three of you, for what you have done. As a young officer, I wish I had taken basic education and counseling courses here at Emporia State, as they would have helped me immensely. I also recommended this to students, that they look at courses in social psychology and behavioral sciences to include behavioral economics, as I have found through the years that is some of the most important skills that I could have gathered here. It also would have taught me how to think and also how to decide and act a lot better. But I hope that you've understood that throughout this entire talk tonight, that education is essential to developing those leaders. Today, most senior military and government leaders are emphasizing education and refocusing on this key area as we draw down from 10 plus years of combat operation, the longest continuous combat operation in the history of the United States. They see education as the essential building block, and they are analyzing on how to educate our people with the right skill sets for the future. And that's part of what I do in my current position, is we have to look out 5, 10, and 20 plus years and say, what is the Army going to look like? And what skills do we need in the people who may not even be born today? And the skills that you have that we need to be effective. So, how can ESU build and develop these leaders for the future? First, we have to ask ourselves, what sets ESU apart from other universities or colleges? What do we stand for, and what are we known for? I think ESU's Center of Excellence should be about leadership, which would be the centerpiece of your ESU experience and education. We already play an important role in transforming young people into productive adults and can play an increasingly important role in developing tomorrow's leaders. We are doing this through a great faculty administration, coupled with a fantastic learning environment, and we are continuously seeking change. In the short term, or the next 1 to 3 years, the idea is to take the current leadership minor and imbue a culture throughout the school based upon leadership, both in the faculty and the administration and the students. Continuously review the program and change as necessary, but really hang our hat on the leadership skills you'll have when you leave ESU. We then take this leadership culture into the community, local businesses, and key leaders, and ask them to mentor students in an informal program and allow the students to help solve some of the most pressing problems that we face today. You, the students, solve the problems. We also need to encourage students, almost demand, that they take a very broad program within the leadership minor that includes a multidisciplined approach. As I mentioned earlier, the current leadership minor is excellent under the tutelage of senior faculty and the energy of Mary and your other instructors. I know it'll only get better and with more resources and the leadership of the current president and the vision for the next 150 years. In the midterm, or the next 3 to 5 years, we can take the minor and create a program with the goal of building multidisciplinary leaders with the skills and education that exemplifies unparalleled leadership and service. We already do some of that here, but need to create new fields of study at Emporia State to include a Master's of Public Administration and a government program so that we gain the synergy created by education, business, and government. We already have fantastic and highly recognized education and business schools and have many successful advanced degrees. But when we lack the third leg of government and Masters in Public Administration, I think there is a missing leg to that stool. Business can't survive without education and government. Education can't survive without business, and there's this circle here of interdependence. If we think about it, all three sectors fit together. So let's start to train our students here before they actually hit the real world and the workforce on what right looks like. In the long term, or 5 years, we can develop and create ESU School of Leadership and Service. This is where we effectively integrate the three main programs of education, business, and leadership, and leverage the many skills resident in these fields of study. As we all know, having an education is important, but actually knowing how to use it in the real world is where it really happens. As part of this evolution in the near future, I recommend that we, as the Emporia State alumni and students, reach out and work with the state of Kansas and the Departments of Education, Defense, and Veterans Affairs and develop ESU into a center of excellence for troops to teachers, and also for returning combat veterans. For those of you who don't know, there is a program called Troops to Teachers. As we draw down the force, we have a lot of people with great skills and education that we think we can apply to the classroom. So we need to bring those two together so that we can create a center of excellence for Troops to Teacher here. I've already talked to a couple people about that today, and we'll be working on that in the near future. Also, I believe that we also need to work with the state of Kansas and the Department of Defense and try to get the ROTC program back here on campus. Along with the focus on the Blue Key and Greek organizations that I know, along with a whole bunch of other multitude of organizations that are out there, some that I served in and many that I did not. ROTC would provide yet a different outlet to grow and learn as a leader. I also think that all of these programs that are out there are critical in developing leaders for the future. And if you are not in one, please, I almost beg you, go get involved. That is where you're really going to learn a lot of valuable skills. It may be difficult for us to get ROTC back on this campus, but we have had a history of having a small but highly effective program with great results for the Army throughout by developing quality leaders. In conclusion, leading is hard and requires different education, skills, and experiences throughout life in order to shape you and others. Tonight I relayed my journey and hopefully answered the question of why he was up there talking to us. I provided thoughts on why leadership is important and described the skills dynamic leaders require, and finally introduced an idea of how ESU can be at the forefront of building dynamic leaders at various stages in their career. No matter what, I hope you take away that ESU is a great place to be, and that I hope you, no matter how long you're here, that you look back on this time fondly, okay, because others do. As we move forward for the next 150 years, I hope we can take our current leadership program and develop into a leadership center that focuses on teaching leadership skills at the undergraduate level, and eventually, like I stated, a school focused on leadership and service at the graduate level. We need to continue to build these multidimensional leaders with integrated skills in order to lead and shape the future of tomorrow. It has been a truly humbling experience being here today in leadership class and also with you here tonight. Thank you for your time and patience. And if you have any questions, I'm willing to sit up here, just like in class, and answer any of them that you may have. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know a lot of you are going to go, whoa, I know a lot of you are going to go, but if there is anything on your mind out there about leadership, the military, national security environment, I'm willing to sit up here and answer them to the best of my abilities. Okay. She was just putting her jacket on. She's like, whoa, I'm putting my hand down. No, I'm serious. I would like to take just a couple minutes to engage with the students, an opportunity. We call these in school free shots. And you get honest feedback. We had some great questions today about national security, great questions about adversity. So what questions do we have? Please. Come on, just be the first. You with the KU Play Heed shirt on. I'm going to call you out. Yep, you got the pink jacket on. Is there anything on your mind? No. Okay, what about the gentleman in front of you? That's an excellent question for those you didn't hear. It's basically the balance between taking care of your people and the responsibilities and the accountability that you have. It's about balance. You have to understand what your people need, but you also have to keep the mission of the organization and the end state in sight. And I can only tell you that that comes through experience. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. I know I have. But I will tell you that my mistakes have been the greatest teachers, so to speak. And you'll make many, but you will also be a better person because of it. Okay, thank you for the question. Sir.
My name is K.D. Thomas Jr., 1967 graduate in this institution. My mentor taught me. And Dr. Butcher had those four functions of management: still to lead a plan, organize, control, and motivate. I had another teacher in economics, and he drilled us on 24 economic terms. It didn't make any difference whether it was a freshman class or a senior class or even a graduate class. You had to know those 24 economic terms. I forgot 95% of economics. I remember those 24 economic terms. And 90% of the people in this country right now don't know the difference between economics and economics. I'm not going to ask you. There is no difference. It's just a different way of saying it. But one of the dreams that I have for this college is for housing for veterans, handicapped veterans. And this college was one of the first colleges in the United States under Dr. King to cater to handicapped students. And I remember hearing stories when I was in school in '67 about people like John Station and Jim Meyer carrying students up to the third floor when they didn't have elevators. So that's my dream, is to put some housing out there, good housing out there for our veterans, maybe subsidized housing, and take care of those handicapped people. And sir, with your leadership ability and influence, if you could help us in that way, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We actually talked a little bit about that today. I am actually working with the Warrior Transition Command as one of the things that I do, of how we can best take care of our wounded warriors. You would be surprised, and I challenge you, go to a Veterans Administration hospital, go to Walter Reed or San Antonio, and to see our veterans who have truly given a lot, okay? And you will see on-fire attitudes where they do not take their current situation as a handicap, but merely a challenge that they can overcome and adapt to. And I will tell you, sir, that I truly believe in that. Because as we mentioned today, a couple of us, that's a whole underserved population out there that I think we, as Emporia State University, can help bring into the fold of our Center of Excellence. A student earlier today asked me about some challenges in the national security arena and what is one of the major threats that we have. I'm not going to say it's the major threat that we're facing, but I will tell you that up on the senior leaders' minds in the Pentagon, one of our biggest threats is our actual debt and deficit. Our debt and deficit are currently shaping how we see the world and how we can react for one of the first times in our recent history. The next is education. We see how important education is, and we're just not so sure that the current system that we have in the United States is going to produce the skill sets that we need. So I ask that each and every one of you out there, especially on the second part, to please help us out on that in developing and leading change in the education arena. Another question? Oh, she didn't tell you that you can't turn your paper in until you ask a question? Okay, going once? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was in southern Baghdad, and we were doing a combat operation. I mentioned this today. We were in the middle of a combat operation, and my vehicle was hit with an RPG. And at that time, that's a rocket-propelled grenade. It ended up going through the back left door and ended up taking off the leg of a medic, so to speak, a medical person that was riding in my vehicle, and I happened to be the only person out of 5 people in the vehicle that did not get injured. So we quickly stopped, we returned fire against the enemy, and then as I was evacuating my crew, my commander came up to me and said, "Hey, you need to leave that for other people to handle because we need to make a quick change to the plan because we need to split in 2 directions and continue to fight the enemy." At that moment in time, you want to take care of your people, but you also understand that as a leader, you have a little bit of a higher calling for your whole organization. And you're tugged and pulled at that moment. And literally, you only got a few seconds. From when the RPG hit my vehicle, or hit our vehicle, I should say, till we had evacuated, started to triage the wounded, developed a new plan, sketched it out on a map, briefed people, rallied troops, and split into two different directions with my battalion commander going one way and I taking the rest of the force going the other way, was approximately 10 minutes. You can't think through things. That whole analytical tools, okay, the data, making decisions, it's a gut feeling. And that was very, very difficult because I knew that people in my crew were wounded, but I couldn't be there to take care of them. That's an excellent question. Sir? We see that more as a tool for standardization within the education system. And like I talked with the president today, and these are a lot smarter people than me, we're going to have to figure out what the right answer is. And there may be multiple answers to that. But within our military, we have a minimum standard. And I will also tell you, though, that approximately 60+% of all high school graduates aren't even eligible to come into the Army. Think about that. So as we look out the force 10, 20 years from now, and you got to understand, the United States Army is the largest recruiter in the world. Every year we recruit over 160,000 new people. Okay? We rely on a workforce. We rely on educated people. We rely on them to be new leaders. Okay? And if 2/3 of your force, of your population is not even eligible to come in, it makes it very, very difficult. Let me put it to you that way. Okay? Sir? That's a very important question, and I've faced that point numerous times, currently right now. I held an off-site conference to where, fortunately, my boss believes in where we're going, but I can't get my peers to go there. I will answer your question first. You have to quickly lay out the problem set for them. Then after that, you have to have an immediate recommendation. Think like they're going to think and analyze how they're going to troubleshoot you, and then you in turn have to counteract that. Try to do that in about 2 pages, because that's what I learned in graduate school. Okay? And I'm telling you, it's very, very difficult, but that's a way to do it. Getting your peers to change is even more difficult, I think, because there's this competitiveness of, well, why are you better than me? And why is your idea better than my idea? And that's where the tough leadership comes into, in order to try to inspire them, in order to make change. Good questions. Next. Sir. Yes, sir. Great question, and I mentioned this earlier today, and I mentioned a little bit tonight. In today's global world, you have a complexity of languages, cultures, religions, and ideas that are clashing all over the world. And we got briefed by a very senior guy who laid out the world. About 80-some% of the people live by water. They all hover around the equator. Okay? And also, it's where almost all of the resources are at and the challenges are in the world. If you read that book, The Bottom Billion, you will be very, very surprised. But when I lived in Germany for 4 years, and I lived in South Korea for 4 years, and I was in Iraq for a year, and the tours and stuff that I've had in other places, getting out and seeing and knowing the people, and in the military we call it, don't be the ugly American, okay? is to learn their culture will go a long ways. And I believe that in the United States that we have to build that into the curriculum as we develop students. And I'm not just talking about a basic language skill. I'm talking embrace the cultures that you have and the diversity that you have here on this campus with all of your foreign students. You know, you have numerous students that they can put on, you know, a teach, so to speak, about their country. But it's not something out of a book. It's from the people who live there. That is more important than anything you can learn out of a book. Ma'am. Stretch your mind, because you need to analyze your weaknesses. And instead of shying away from those weaknesses, one of mine is communication skills. I was not very good, and still really not good, in the written communication area. So I hit it head on. Every opportunity I had, I went out and tried to improve myself. One last question out there. This is called the cricket moment. Everybody's waiting for that one person. Okay, well, I'll relieve you of that. If there's nothing else that you took away from tonight, please understand that education is extremely important. Also, I want you to take away that Emporia State is home. You will always be welcomed here, as like I stated, when I returned, I had instructors from 22 years ago coming up and saying hi. You're not going to find that in very many places. And I also want to leave you with one final last thought. You got a phenomenal president over here and First Lady of the university. You have great faculty, you have alumni, and you have trustees that believe in you. But we need your help as the students to get to that next level. That may require you to stand up and be leaders on campus, and I challenge you to go out and to do that. Thank you, and good night.